The steps of grafting is the very first step is your pre-care. And the pre-care is probably one of the most important steps of grafting. You got to make sure, one, that you've got good healthy rootstock. Two, you don't want your rootstock to be soaking wet. Typically what you would do for rootstock is you would set it in a greenhouse, preferably a dry one where it can dry out a little bit, for about 2 weeks. And if you have bottom heat or something like that that can help activate some of the roots to get that rootstock started growing, you'll start to see white rooting on the rootstock themselves.
So to be fair, this isn't typically when we would be doing our winter grafts. You'd kind of be ending by about the time they're slowing down on summer grafts. Once they've dropped leaf, we would let them harden off. We typically start most of our winter prop a little after December, sometimes early December, just depends on the season, but normally it's right into January.
And grafting is one of these things where if you talk to 100 grafters, you would get 100 different answers on how they graft. This is how we do it. We've sort of conglomerated a lot of other grafters that we've learned from into how we do it here. And this is how we're successful with grafting, and that's basically what we teach. There's a million different ways to graft, and then there's a million different ways to graft Japanese maples specifically. Drying out rootstocks is something that's always kind of critical, especially during the winter months. If you don't dry out your rootstock, you are often pushing too much sap in your tree to really have a successful graft. And what will happen is it'll often push a lot of sap through the tree and will sometimes push your graft off of the rootstock itself.
We basically normally break grafting down into 3 categories. We call it the ABCs of Grafting Japanese maples. And Tim got into it a little bit on the advanced care, the A's. Really, the A and the C are the most important things. If you work at a nursery like the Buckholtz farm that we've purchased, you know, the most high-end people are doing the A and the C. The simple, easy step is the B. That's the part everybody loves, the blades of glory. That's what we call the middle part there. That's the easiest part, honestly. That's the easiest, cheapest labor is normally the grafting part. It's the skill really is in the A and the C. And that's the advanced care before you do it, and then the post care after you're done.
We talked a little bit about rootstock, and really, that's something that's really important.
So let's give them a few of the terms for this.
The next thing we want to look at is a scion. Now, a scion is more like this. It's the last year's growth that you see that just came on the tree. You're looking for something that's about this size here or thicker. One of the things, what a scion is basically the cutting from the tree you're trying to produce. The tree we actually have scions for today is Tamukiyama. It's a red weeping lace leaf, selection from over 300 years ago, but it still holds its color the best of almost any of the varieties. Leaves out 2 weeks later, avoids the later threat of frost, making it one of the best weeping umbrella red lace leaves that's on the market. But you take a cutting off of that Tamukiyama, and it can be what we call nodes. Those are the spaces in between the buds. We're looking for 2 to 3 nodes, typically what we graft. If you're grafting something that's really rare, you can actually go through and graft each individual node to get more grafts from that tree. But at the same time, you're not going to have as big of a spring push on a 1-noded tree versus a 3-noded tree. But as you can see here, we've got a healthy scion from a healthy rootstock. That's something from a healthy stock plant. That's one of the things that's really important to do is have a healthy tree. Sometimes people will go out there and they'll say, I really want to produce this tree because it's dying. Well, viruses can actually build up in the tissues of plants, and when you graft a tree, you're cloning not only what you're seeing, but you're also cloning the viruses that could be in that plant. And so if you're producing from an unhealthy tree, you might have unhealthy grafts from that. So that's just one thing to consider.
Okay, so there's some different terms we'll go over. Basically, the rootstock is what we're grafting through. The stock plant is what we're grafting from. So this one, again, like Tim said, is Tamukiyama. So Tamukiyama is what we only want to typically graft name varieties unless you're evaluating something to introduce it. There'd be no reason to graft green seedlings back to green seedlings because you'll be back where you started. You get about 100% take if you mess it up, but it doesn't do any good. So basically, like Tim said, this is a lace leaf form that's dark maroon, and we're going to be putting on a green understock. Now, why we choose a green understock is it's a vigorous, healthy root system. Basically, why Japanese maples are grafted is because a lace leaf like this wouldn't do so well on its own roots. So if we rooted this, you certainly could do it. I've rooted thousands of maples in my lifetime, but there's tons of maples that would just be complete wimps on their own root system. So by grafting it, we put it on a very vigorous, healthy root system. Green tends to be one of the preferred things in the trade. It's Acer palmatum subspecies palmatum to be technical with you. It's basically a small leaf green. The reason we like those, they develop great root systems and they heal quickly. And so those are keys for an understock. You don't want something that's very slow to heal, and you want something that has a good motor behind it, because we're trying to grow this tree going forward.
By grafting a tree also, we add a level of prevention for disease. There's things called Pseudomonas verticillum that are naturally in our soils. Rooted cuttings may actually catch those very easily. And if you think about it, if you have a clonal root system, one, the root system's not as good as your root system from a seedling, but two, if you have 1,000 of one variety out there and it has the same root system, if one gets infected, they all get infected. And so by grafting, we basically add that extra layer of defense on disease for a grafted Japanese maple. On top of that, seedlings don't come back true to form. They're kind of like me and Matt. We're brothers. We look very different. We have the same parents, but
we don't look exactly alike. Same thing with...
He can handle the sun.
Well, you know, you have glasses on, so
yeah. He can handle full sun. I need protection from the hot afternoon sun. We got different color hair. I mean, it's so many different
things. With Japanese maples, you'll get some that look more like the parent plant, some that look completely different. There's a ton of variability going on there. So if what you were looking for was a Tamukiyama and you grew seeds from it, well, you might get a 30-foot tree that's an upright red. So it would look completely different than what we're going for here. So we're locking in these traits. Kind of think of the cultivars of Japanese maples like a breed of dog. So you kind of know what you're getting. If you're wanting a Great Dane, you might not want a Chihuahua in that spot in the yard. But we're locking in those traits, so we kind of know what we're looking for.
The biggest culprit of this is blood good. Anyone sees a red Japanese maple, they say, oh, it's a blood good. They collect seedlings from it. They get some red seedlings, some are green. They throw blood good on them all. They sell them at a local tailgate market, and they've essentially bastardized the name blood good when each and every seedling is different. And the cultivar is really the only grafted form from a blood good Japanese maple, if that makes sense.
So as y'all have any questions, just feel free to ask. Now, basically, this is a scion. This is our cutting we're taking from the stock plant or the mother plant that we want to produce from. So we're making clones of that plant, basically, and we're locking in those traits on that root system. So basically, they're going to be pretty uniform going forward. There's going to be some variability. Now, if you grow this in Texas, or if you grow it in Oregon, or if you grow it
sunlight versus shade,
there could be growth differences to it. Like, you know, in Nacogdoches, Texas, they only get 2 months of dormancy. So they're going to be bigger there because they don't shut down for as long as here. So there's some differences, but overall you're going to be able to understand what this is and have some defined characteristics that are repeated in your scion.
All right, so basically there's a million different ways to make a cut of a scion. Again, we're looking for something where we've got 2 to 3 nodes. What we're going to do is we're going to hold in one hand the buds with one hand, and then try to make a nice clean cut. And what we're doing here is we're cutting it down to a point.
Now we're basically making a modified side veneer graft. It's a small wedge. Now what Tim was saying is you have the alternating buds here on maples. What I tend to do is hold those buds between my finger and my thumb like that, because those buds are what are my chances of taking. So if I'm mashing on it like this, you know, against the buds, and I'm breaking the buds, I'm just less chance for that to take, right?
So I'm going to pass this around so you can see.
With a modified side veneer graft, what we're doing, you have 2 sides to it, and it gives you 2 chances to take, because you can essentially take on either side of that. It's nearly impossible to have the exact same size rootstock as you do scion, but in an ideal world you will. This, I believe, was a 607, the curved blade. You'll see the Tina 607, or it could be 604, I forget, but no, it doesn't really matter. But it's more of that curved blade like that. Now these are more popular for conifers. So a lot of conifer grafters will be using that curved blade like that. But to be honest, it doesn't do you any favors for maples, so I typically skip these for Japanese maples.
It helps for higher sap plants.
With the 605, we have that flatter blade like that, and we're trying to make as clean a cut as possible. So a little more ideal there for a Japanese maple graft.
And on most of these grafting knives, the more expensive grafting knives, what you have is a flat side on one side, sharpened side on the other side. People make a big mistake of sharpening both sides. It's typically one-sided for a reason. It's because you can put the flat side up against the base of the tree and make a clean cut. If you're just starting out, you know, like Matt said, you can start out with a 2-sided knife. And then I think there's some that you can find on Amazon that may cost, you know, 15, 20 bucks for a cheaper grafting knife?
Now, before we hand out the knives or we pass these around, we've had people get cut. I mean, I've taught grafting classes at NC State. They tend to sell out. We've taught several kind of fundraiser classes for NC State. We get some blood sometimes in those classes. So first rule of thumb is don't cut your thumb. You never want to be cutting toward yourself. The way Tim was doing that, we're actually making a motion away from our thumb like that. When I was a less experienced grafter, I would wrap my thumb sometimes with like a tape or something like that, so I could keep that thumb protected if I'm cutting toward it. Now, one other thing I always mention, the easiest way to get actually injured with a grafting knife is to drop it and decide to catch it. I've seen people do that. So if you do drop the knife, move your feet, everything, but don't try to catch it. That's the thing that always tends to get people, is because you are working with a knife and it slips out. Now, a big key to safety is sharp knives. Now, these haven't been sharpened a lot this season, to be honest with you, either. You want to have a very sharp grafting knife. If you have a very unsharp grafting knife, what tends to happen, you see people going like this and they're digging into it. When you're cutting into your rootstock, it's a very small cut. We're not cutting deep into it. So the less sharp your knife is, the more likely you are to cut through, some small tree like this. So it's not going to take a lot just to go right through it. And then again, you're kind of,
And we'll get into the actual cut.
A little more dangerous when you're doing that too.
We'll get into the actual cut on the rootstock here in a minute. That's something that is really simple. Actually, let's just go ahead and talk about that for a second too.
So we tend to leave this thing called a sap stump when we're doing the rootstock. So we'll come back and uniform cut all this rootstocks back to about this level. At the Buckholz farm, they'll actually even do it with a weed eater. So I'll just come through and take the whole tops out of thousands of these. But yeah. I mean, there's 40,000 of them there. You just chop the tops out.
Wow, that sounds dangerous.
Yeah. I don't wear glasses. It's, you're cutting them about, it depends on the height, but we do tend to leave this backside. So if I were going to graft to this, I'd be grafting about right here, and I'd be leaving this part. This is called the sap stump. Now, the reason we leave this on winter grafts is because it gives an exit point for any additional moisture that's going to be coming up. So we'll graft the graft into the tree here. We'll leave the back. And then as spring comes along, we'll reduce the size of that sap stump back down to the graft completely eventually. When we purchased Highland Creek Nursery, some of y'all may know Brian Upchurch. I don't know if y'all have ever toured that farm. He has Carolina Truffle Farm now in Fletcher. We purchased his business in 2013. It was a custom liner business. If we were really pushing it in a given year, Tim and I do about 20 to 30,000 grafts in a year. We can typically do about 500 a day between us if we're really busy. If we had people setting us up to go and we're like max production. Some of our grafters at Buckholz can, they can get to that 600 mark even. Some really experienced grafters. So the key is just learning with, gradually getting better in time. And it's a skill that the more you practice it, the better you get. And an easy way to practice cutting your scions is actually on the top of your tree. So you can actually take what I cut off here and threw away and practice cutting some scions out of that. Same motion, same thing. And it gives you a couple more chances to get used to that motion before you actually cut your scion to go onto your plant. So you can kind of use these to cheat a little bit to get some experience in. But you don't want to graft that back to your tree because they will take it 100%. And it will be the same thing you started out with before you did anything. So don't do that. And again, Tim talked about labeling. We do 1,500 varieties. So we label them at the point of graft. It's the only way to be accurate. If you think you're going to label a whole tray and come back and pick the ones out that were different later, you're going to have a mess on your hands. So we try to label everything at that very point because nomenclature is super important. And basically what we do is we create a small wedge in our rootstock that scion Tim cut earlier is going to lay into. So I'm going to cut a scion here as well. Again, I'm holding the buds with my fingers so I'm not breaking the buds. And what I do is just a motion. I let the knife do all the work, and I try to keep things even. So I'm just making this motion here. You can cut scions like this. I have people do it like that. I have people do it a ton of different ways. I find this is a great way for beginning because you're cutting away from yourself, and it's just you're less chances of getting nicked, and it's actually really efficient. Like I'll do it this way. If I'm doing 500 a day, I'm doing it this way. So it's kind of a great way to do it.
And we'll often, do 15 or 20, lay them out, then start throwing them on trees pretty quickly too.
So you don't want to leave your scion they can refrigerate for a week or two, but you really want to graft your scion pretty quickly after you graft it. It's just like a piece of fruit starts going bad, so you don't want this sitting out in a hot greenhouse decaying over time, while you're getting your rootstock ready. So you kind of want to cut them when you're going to be doing it.
But as you notice probably when you're looking at this is a pretty good point. What you don't want are spoons. So if it curves inward, then it's gonna have a pocket of air between it and the tree. What we gotta do is create it to line up so that the cambium, which is the green right underneath the bark, lines up. Yeah, I'll push this back around so I can look at it again. So the green lines up with the green cambium on your rootstock. When you do that, that's what you're doing. Essentially, when we're grafting, all we're doing is we're injuring the plant and then cutting this branch off, putting it in the injury, and getting it to heal back together. So we've got to keep this as clean as possible during the whole time.
We also use rubber bands to seal them to them. Depends on what you're using. There's some smaller. Let me get a smaller one so they can see into it.
To keep them clean, I always use rubbing alcohol. You can get rubbing alcohol with a paper towel. You can clean your scion. You can clean your knife. I always recommend cleaning your knife in between sets. So if you're moving between scions cut from different trees, you know, always best to just keep those clean and keep your pruners clean as well.
So what he's saying by that is, say we're grafting these Tamukiyama and you've cut all these, and next you're going to graft Shishigashira. Clean your trimmers and clean your utensils between this set and the next named variety. So it's a great way to make sure everything's staying real sanitary.
We're making surgical precision cuts here. If you get a lot of things, you know, bad, you know, viruses or funguses or whatever in that cut, it's just like if you got that in your hand. It's not going to heal as quickly, and your graft's likely not going to take.
So I'm going to do a little cut on this now. I'm going to do it a little high on this one, actually higher than I was saying earlier, just for demonstration purposes, so it's a little hard for you to see. Now again, I want the knife to do all the work. So I'm holding my rootstock above where I'm cutting, and I'm cutting not toward anything right now. So I'm literally just going to put the knife there and let the knife do the cut like that. And I'm not digging deep into that tree. If I'm cutting deep into that tree, yeah, I'm damaging it too much. It's going to make more places for it to heal.
Now how you do that is you make sure when you're doing that, that your blade is fairly flat against the base of the tree. If you angle it, you're going to cut into the tree. If you keep it flatter against the base of the tree, you're going to get less depth into the tree. And it'll be a safer and cleaner cut.
Basically what we're going to do is we're going to take our wedge graft and we're going to set it into that pocket we've created, and I'll pass that around. What I tend to do is take my thumb as I put the scion into the rootstock and use my thumbnail to line that up. And I'm actually going to tie this one kind of open so you can see into it. But I'm going to tie a rootstock around this, and I'll do more demonstration on the tying. But I tie up the rootstock. You can get as fancy this as you want. I know people that have them that untie by just one little bow when they pull on them. You want to go back down the rootstock though, so you're not creating a simple wedge against your scion. So I go up the rootstock to seal it, and then back down to the base, so that my pressure point isn't at a higher wedge, if that makes sense. So we're not creating a place. Now what you don't want to see when you do that is you don't want to hold that up and see a lot of daylight. If you got a little moon door going on there, chances it takes are pretty bad. All right, so I'm going to demonstrate a rubber band here a little bit for you. Basically, we take it, and it's just kind of like tying a balloon. We don't do anything too... You can get as fancy with this as you want. I have friends that tie it where when you get through in the winter, you just pull one string and the whole thing falls off. I tend to tie them so that they stay on very well. And all I do, I'm right-handed, so I take with my left hand and I wrap the rubber band around, and I secure it with my pointer finger in my right hand like that. So all I've done is just wrap it around itself. Now, I'm going to do these open so you can see into them. Oftentimes, I will close that up if I'm actually grafting for myself. And I wrap up the tree, and then I wrap back down to where I started, and I tie it off just like a balloon where I started. And the reason I do that is because I don't want all the pressure up here if I just go one direction. I made too strong of a push against that scion. Now, again, a lot of times I'll close that up, and it's fine too. For the purposes of learning, it's nice to have a little bit of sight in there, because when you get to this stage, you don't want to be seeing through your graft. So you want to make sure that your graft can be still aligned, but we'll pass that around some too.
So can tying it too tight?
Tying it too tight could definitely misalign it, yeah. So if you tie your rubber bands, one of the things a mistake I was making early on was tying it too tightly, and I was kind of forcing my graft off the union a little bit.
That's why coming back around down the other way keeps all the pressure down at the point rather than at the top.
And you got to make a good cut. You can't just smash them together with a rubber band, because then it doesn't take.
So y'all pretty much all got your grafts now tied. Now begins the aftercare. This is the C part. This is one of the most important stages of this. At this stage, you want to keep your rootstocks as dry as possible, and just watering it just lightly on top, enough to keep the tree alive as it continues to heal. This is one of the mistakes people make a lot of times is they get to this stage and they're like, all right, now let's water it. And they're trying to force it to come out quickly, and you create more sap and a lot more issues where the graft's not going to take. Overwatering at this stage is one of the easiest things to do. Just a light, damp watering on top. Like if I had a hose that had a mist kind of thing, it wouldn't be on top of this for more than a second and a half, maybe 2 seconds. And that's the minimal type of watering we want to do at this stage. And it's important to keep high humidity. Sometimes people will take, if you don't have a greenhouse, they'll take a Ziploc bag, put over top of your scion, pull down around where the graft part is, and tie that off around the base to keep humidity around the actual graft. It's not necessarily about the scion as much as it is about the actual graft. So make sure you use a bag that's big enough, that's bigger than your scion. For instance, like you've got a larger scion on yours, you'd have to use the larger bag or cut your scion that's sticking up down a little bit smaller.
Now what you got to do when you get done with that, you have to take some trimmers and cut a piece of that and let the air slowly get in there too and acclimate that humidity out. So you don't want to take the whole baggie off at once. You look in there, you start to see some leaf break, you start to see those buds swelling. That's when you want to cut the bag with some scissors, let some of that humidity slowly come out of there. A couple days later, start to remove a little more. A couple days later, take the whole bag off.
And if you want to cheat sometimes and really be able to take it as slow as possible, you know, when you're doing that, if it's a cloudy day versus a sunny day, you're still going to have more humidity on those days versus a day that's a bright, a sunny day to open that bag up. And
that's a great way to get some humidity around these if you're going to have to put them in a garage or something like that. I didn't bring any bags, or I'd do that demonstration, but sandwich bags will work great. Like just a little sandwich bag, and you can secure them to the graft either with like a twist tie or a rubber band as well. It's just kind of the same way.
Now, when you see that leafing out and that scion, the new growth has started to harden off, that's really one of the best times to come in and prune off the rest of your rootstock. You don't leave that sap stump on there after the graft has taken and the flush of growth is really starting to harden off. If you prune that off, then that's really one of the safer times to be able to remove the rest of the rootstock down to your graft point.
Typically in March, we'll go ahead and remove that off. You'll actually push a little bit of energy into the scion when you do it at the right time. Right before it leaves out, the buds are swelling, you've got a good take. You do it during that time, you'll actually get a faster growth out of the new flush.
But if that flush of growth has already happened, then I just wait until that soft growth has hardened up a little bit.
That way you're not forcing too much sap into it at once. So there's always a little balance there. I mean, the main thing is not taking that humidity away too quickly. Provide some humidity, remove it slowly. Don't overwater them. You can water so much that basically pushes the scion off the graft even after it takes. So you don't want to overwater it at first. Once the tree leaves out, treat it like a regular tree. You want to get it in some shade, let it acclimate a little bit, and give it a ample amount of water, but not overwater it while it's...
Our first year, we grafted 20,000 grafts that we took over from my dad. Grafted 20,000 grafts. We got in there, got happy, and started overwatering everything in the greenhouse. And out of the 20,000 grafts, think about how long that takes. All winter long. We only had 600 take because we overwatered everything. So it's easy to make mistakes in this process, but it's also easy to go back and say, well, what did I do wrong? How do I learn from this? And then keep going forward.
So now that you have a fresh graft, I wouldn't recommend putting that in direct full sun. It doesn't matter during the winter. I would recommend not at all during the winter because you'll just force it out. But once it's in leaf, the more shade you can give it until fall. Like you can put it, once it's established and it's a good, healthy looking plant, say by fall you have a little tree that's 6 inches in each direction weeping, you can plant that next fall in a more sunny spot, let it get acclimated over winter and then leaf back out in the spring. But you'd want to slowly acclimate it to that.
Any
other questions? I appreciate y'all coming. I don't know if anybody...
Thank y'all so much. This is amazing.
I'm glad that nobody cut their thumb off.
Hey, good job.
Didn't have to break out the first aid kit.